As well, Sharon, I want to cover a number of items in this video, but I want to start by this. I got an email from the video I did recently called The Waking Nightmare. So I'm a good friend of mine, I've known a while, and she is a professor at a prestigious university. And she said, I've been involved in a lot of these diversity workshops and so on and so forth. But she said, the thing that really struck me about the piece you did was an experience I had where I was sitting in a group, and it was one of these exercises where you were supposed to describe yourself in 3 words, right? And they're going around the room. And people are going, and then they come to this one gentleman who starts off with saying, his first descriptor is, I'm a black man. And it really struck her that that identifier was not something that she would consider for herself, that she was a white woman. It doesn't occur to her. It doesn't occur to me when I get up in the morning. Oh, I'm a white man. That's who I am. But this gentleman, for obvious reasons, as he gets up and moves through the world, is very aware that he is a black man. So what I've been trying to think about, based on what I was talking about in the last video, is, okay, what happens now if I get up every day and I say to myself, okay, I'm a white man in this culture right now. What does that mean? And so because of the kind of work I do, I thought, well, okay, let's go back to the beginning of the country, because there's this big concern about riots, right? Now, it turns out the riots were a very small percentage of the people who were actually out there marching, and that has been basically eliminated. And I don't want to get into the whole thing about who the rioters were and all that kind of stuff. But I thought, there's a date. Let me just look so I get it right. Yeah, December 16th, 1773. December 16th, 1773. Now, I don't remember that. Maybe I was taught that date when I was a kid. I remember all the other ones, right? Well, that was the first date of probably, in terms of the history books, the first American riot. Or was it? The Boston Tea Party, right? Where a bunch of people jumped on a bunch of ships that were in the Boston Harbor and threw overboard 300 and some odd chests of tea that belonged to the British East India Company. They did it because the United Kingdom was broke, and they just kept taxing everybody, in their empire. And they finally came up with this tax on tea, and it was kind of like the last straw. If you can't even afford to sit down and have a cup of tea. Okay, so here we have a situation where people rioted, where they destroyed property, all right? Then what gets interesting is that during this time, before and after the tea tax, this guy, John Hancock, remember him, the guy with the big signature, and Samuel Adams, also a Revolutionary War personality. They became smugglers. They got tea from the Dutch, and they were smuggling it into the country. And it got pretty expensive. And even when it got as much or more expensive than the tea from British East Indies, they kept buying the Dutch tea, okay? So here we have a riot, a destruction of property, and a couple of guys who become felons. That's pretty much what the story was. Now, we're on the other side of history, so we don't see it that way, right? We see this as a legitimate protest. We see the actions of Hancock and Adams as, patriotic, if you will. It's about perspective. It's about the fact that that is the history of white people in the country. And then from there, I went to the Constitutional Convention. And I mean, it's not a newsflash that 2/3 of the people there, at least, owned slaves. Jefferson, Washington, Madison, Franklin. I didn't know he owned slaves, but he did. He was in Pennsylvania. So these are the men who wrote the Constitution. And what's interesting about Jefferson, who to me is one of the more reprehensible characters in that period of time, for a whole lot of reasons, in the sense that he split and went to France during the whole revolutionary period. But in terms of writing the Constitution, he wanted to insert something in the Constitution that said, yeah, slavery is really terrible and it's reprehensible, but it's okay for us to do it. That's literal. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's the language you want to put in there. He also took Sally Hemings with him to Paris when he skipped out on the war and raped her. He was 14 years old. So now I'm saying a lot about, what is in the common airspace of the liberal American who points fingers at himself and says, these are all terrible things. They are terrible things. And we also have to look at the fact that these men, for themselves, but these men put together a system of government that is unique, that if you look at the mechanics of it, and forget about where we are today, because it doesn't represent anything like what they put together. If you look at the mechanics of it, it's actually quite brilliant. And it is structured in a way so that no one group can overtake another group. There are enough what we call checks and balances, right? Now, it's true, it was one group of white men versus another group of white men, but the system, the concept is there. And it is one that we can resuscitate in the service of where we are now, okay? There has been a movement, obviously, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, about defund the police. And there's a lot of sort of knee-jerk reaction from a lot of white people saying, oh my God, but what's going to happen and how are we going to be protected and all this kind of stuff. Well, first of all, we're kind of stuck in this country with slogans, and we're stuck with Twitter, where we're allowed to sort of pontificate something and then nobody really knows what it means, and it gets repeated over and over and over, and then nobody knows what it means anymore. Defunding the police, I mean, at the obvious level, is that we don't want paramilitary forces in our country. And that's what the police are in major urban areas. Not all of them, but a lot of them, most of them. We don't want that. I don't want that. White people, a lot of white people don't want that, okay? It's not in our interest to live in that kind of environment. I'll tell you, I mean, and this is going to sound ridiculous. Last time I was in New York was about 4 years ago, and I needed some directions, and I thought, man, I'm not going to go ask that guy in that uniform with the body armor on and all the weaponry that he's carrying around. So the idea of defund the police, in a way, needs its own constitutional convention. And because we need to figure out how this works. I mean, the idea is very clear, but you got to implement it. And so there are two people I listened to this week in terms of that. One was Killer Mike, who basically said, look, yes, protest. And then you got to mobilize and you got to organize and you got to plot and you have to plan, because we have to actualize what the protest is about. Otherwise, it just burns out. And it's a very useful protest because, number one, it has happened very quickly and in so many places around the world, and it is multiracial, okay? So there are people, white people, who are involved in this, at least some of whom are there for themselves, which is, again, something I'm trying to say to white people, which is, you're not doing this for somebody else. You're doing it for you, because you don't want to live anymore in the world that we have been living in. It's horrible. It's a horrible thing for you as a white person. It is so detached from reality and so cruel and so uncaring, even though you may think of yourself as a good person. Okay. So I want this for me. That's why I'm involved. Okay. So there's the Killer Mike idea. And then I was listening to Senator Kamala Harris, who said, yes, we need to reform the police. And that's not going to solve the problem, because safe communities are not built on policing. If you think about it, policing, first of all, it's the force of the state. And second of all, it gets involved when there's a problem. The question is, why is there a problem? Well, the answer is kind of obvious. When you can't get a decent job, when you can't get decent housing, when your kids can't get educated, there's no safety in that community because there's a tremendous amount of rage, rightfully so. So Defunding the police, yes, does bleed into we can use the money elsewhere, but it's just a piece of the puzzle, right? And our role as white people, as I said in the last video, is to listen from here, to listen from the heart, not the ears, to listen from the heart, because that will inform us as to what our role is in this. Because until 2040, we're still a majority race in the country. And we are going to need to get organized in our own racial community, if that's the way to say it. We need to be part of the conversation, but part of the conversation from the standpoint of hearing what it's like. So let me give you an example. If you go in your wallet, you probably have $1, $5, $10, and $20 bills. Two of those bills have pictures of slave owners on them. I haven't looked at the coins, but I'm pretty sure it's a similar ratio. Imagine for a moment what it is like for a white person, for a black person to reach in their pocket every day and use currency that has slaveholders on it. You can't imagine that. You can think about it. You can become aware of it, which is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to understand how the world that I live in and all the things that I assume and don't even think about are impacting other people. And if that's okay with me. And I'm telling you, that's not okay with me. So we have a country that is based on protest and is based on the idea that if we don't like the government, we can change the government. It doesn't matter if there's all kinds of force and power that says you can't. We can change the government. We've done it. We're going to do it again. So what I'm going to suggest to you is that you think about those kinds of things in your experience that you take for granted, that you would like everybody to be able to take for granted. And you think about how you might be a factor in implementing that. And as I said, it really doesn't have to be anything grand. As a matter of fact, it's probably better if it isn't. Because there's way too many people out there pontificating about what the solutions are. We need to live in this a bit longer, I think. So that's one chunk of what I wanted to say. Let's take the idea of protest and what's happening in the United States and what's happening around the world as a result. I think in a way, this is a template for what is coming over the next several months. And there are elements here that are going to be, I believe, amplified in the sense that what we're seeing is multiracial, right? Everybody is getting in the street with everybody else and saying this is not okay. Sometime in July, the $600 extra payment on unemployment goes away. Sometime from July into August, maybe it'll bleed into September, unemployment will end. And without going into the nitty-gritty detail, and I'm going to give you the name of somebody in a minute who can take you into the nitty-gritty detail, I think that what we're going to see is the protest expand into the economic injustice of Black people, yes, and white people. Not the same comparison at all, but they're going to be people who can't feed their families, who are white, who used to be able to struggle by, who used to be able to pay the debts and feed their family and keep a roof over their head and basically have nothing left. That's been going on for quite a while. That's why Trump got elected, because everybody figured out the government wasn't working for them. Now, it's a bad reaction, obviously, but that hasn't gone away, and it's actually gotten worse. So there's a guy named Reggie Middleton, and he's an extraordinary man. I mean, if you take a look at some of his videos in terms of when he describes his history and his history in relation to police, this is a guy who also predicted 2008, and this is a guy who knows, what I knew, and he's a finance guy and I'm more of an operating guy, but this whole thing was going to fall apart anyway. COVID just pushed it over the edge faster. If you really want to understand what's happening, in terms of economics and finance, listen to that guy, because he's he's got the street cred. He's been a very successful guy. He's a forward thinker in terms of how all this works. And you need to get educated. You need to get educated in terms of what's really going on. And it's interesting that he's a black man and he saw 2008, and Nassim Taleb is a Lebanese man and he saw 2008, and all the white guys didn't see it, right? I don't know exactly what that's about, but it's a fact. So get educated about what's coming, because it is going to impact you. There's no way around it. It's going to impact all of us. All the things that we have taken for granted in our economy, and more importantly, in my mind, our monetary system, they're just not true. They're not going to work. And we can all freak out about it and watch our 401ks go down or whatever it is you've got going on. Or we can begin to do the same kind of thing that will take place in the area of defund the police, which is, okay, this doesn't work. Now what are we going to do, right? And freaking out and pointing fingers and all that kind of stuff, which will go on, is not going to be particularly useful. So get yourself educated, get yourself aware, understand what kind of a country you want to live in. You want to live in, okay? Not for the other guy, you. Because when you do it for the other guy, you got a trap door, you got an escape hatch. Oh, I'd like to do it for you, but I gotta go do something. No, you do it for you. So we're in this now. And yes, I work with dreams, and I could put a little plug in here about how this all works. The only thing I'm going to say to you is that the way you can tune in and tap into what's happening is if you live from your heart. And your heart speaks the language of your dreams. And you all dream. Okay. I hope this was helpful, and I'll talk to you soon.